еще более опасным существующим.
The case itself is aimed at Mr. Gusinsky.
This gentleman should not be prosecuted for any reason.
Today in the heart of Moscow, behind the cold granite walls of the Kremlin, something dark and irreversible is taking place. Russia's longtime ruler, Vladimir Putin, no longer commands the image of the calm, calculating leader who once seemed unshakable. The man who built his empire on intimidation and control is now trapped inside the very system he created, a fortress of fear that is beginning to devour itself. Once seen as the symbol of stability, Putin now appears desperate, restless, and paranoid, lashing out at anyone he suspects might betray him. The war in Ukraine, once meant to secure his legacy, has become a wound that refuses to heal. The economy strains under the weight of sanctions. Ordinary citizens whisper about shortages, about sons who never came home, about a future that feels smaller every day. Across the country, anger simmers beneath the surface, erupting in sudden bursts of protest before being crushed by riot police. Inside the Kremlin, the silence is even more dangerous, a silence filled with fear. Putin has ruled Russia for nearly a quarter century. During that time, he has cultivated an image of strength, discipline, and control. He was the man who returned order after the chaos of the 1990s, who silenced gangsters and tamed the oligarchs. When he first took office, he summoned 21 of Russia's wealthiest men, the oligarchs who had carved up the remnants of the Soviet Union and turned them into their private kingdoms. They expected a deal. They received a warning. Putin told them they could keep their fortunes, their power, as long as they stayed out of politics and bowed to his authority. Those who obeyed prospered. Those who didn't vanish. Mikhail Khodorkovsky, once Russia's richest man, dared to challenge him. He was dragged from his plane, tried for fraud, and locked away in a Siberian prison for almost 10 years. Vladimir Gusinsky, who founded NTV and dared to mock the Kremlin on television, fled to Spain after armed agents raided his office. The system was simple. Loyalty was rewarded, defiance was fatal. The oligarchs grew richer, the generals more obedient, and the propaganda machine louder. The image of Putin as the unbreakable Tsar spread across Russia and beyond. Yet behind that image, the man himself was changing. The longer he ruled, the more isolated he became. Every year, his circle of trusted confidants grew smaller, and every decision became more his alone. Now, with the war dragging on, the myth of Putin's infallibility is shattering. His once loyal followers are being punished, discarded, or destroyed. Even the most devoted servants of his regime are learning that loyalty no longer guarantees safety. Take Sergei Markov, a political scientist and one of Putin's oldest defenders. For decades, Markov served as a faithful mouthpiece for the Kremlin, describing Putin as one of history's great men. He echoed every official line from Crimea to the Donbass. When the full invasion began, he justified it as a liberation, insisting that Russia's soldiers were freeing Ukraine from neo-Nazis. On Western television, he accused the United States of controlling Kyiv, calling the war a noble battle against American puppets. Markov's loyalty seemed absolute, until yesterday, when the Russian Justice Ministry declared him a foreign agent. The label is one of the Kremlin's most damning punishments, reserved for those accused of serving foreign interests. Overnight, Markov's career and reputation disintegrated. His accounts were frozen, his movements tracked, and his media appearances restricted. Shocked, he protested his innocence, claiming he had been framed by enemies of Russia. He reminded everyone that he had spent 25 years supporting Putin, that he was under Western sanctions for his loyalty, and that the accusation was absurd. But the Kremlin didn't respond. Putin didn't defend him. The silence said everything. Then came Roman Alyokhin, a nationalist from the Kursk region near the Ukrainian border. Once a policeman, he reinvented himself as a patriotic blogger and media entrepreneur. His Telegram channel boasted over 150,000 followers. He raised funds for soldiers, shared battlefield updates, and spread propaganda about Russia's heroic fight. He was rewarded for his devotion, made an advisor to the regional governor, and celebrated in state media. But as corruption scandals spread through Kursk, his allies began to fall. The governor was arrested for stealing 1 billion rubles for fortifications. Alyokhin was accused of laundering donations and buying luxury cars with war money. A video appeared showing him bragging about shady deals. Within days, he too was labeled a foreign agent. Alyokhin's reaction mirrored Markov's: disbelief and outrage. He swore he had never taken a single ruble from foreigners, pointed to his sanctions from Ukraine as proof of loyalty, and begged to be cleared. But his words vanished into the void. Once the Kremlin marks someone, the verdict is permanent. The same machine that once elevated him had now crushed him without mercy. And there was Tatyana Montyan, perhaps the most tragic. Born in Crimea, trained as a lawyer in Moscow, she became a notorious figure in Ukraine for her fierce pro-Russian views. When the Maidan revolution swept through Kyiv, she sided with Moscow and fled east. She became one of Russia's most visible propagandists, appearing on RT and other state channels, arguing that Ukraine had betrayed its people. She called the invasion a liberation of brothers. Her fiery monologues earned her fame and protection in Moscow. But today, even Montyan is out in the cold. The Kremlin officially labeled her both a terrorist and an extremist, one of the harshest designations in Russian law. Her bank accounts were frozen, her property seized, and her communications monitored. No explanation was given. Some claim she misused donation money. Others whisper that she criticized the army's failures too loudly. Either way, her downfall shows just how unpredictable Putin's wrath has become. Yesterday's ally is today's enemy. And now, even Sergei Lavrov, the veteran foreign minister, the polished diplomat who has defended Putin on every international stage, appears to be falling from grace. Lavrov has been Russia's face to the world for over 20 years, tirelessly repeating the Kremlin's talking points. He defended every annexation, every war crime, every lie. But something changed. When the Kremlin held a key Security Council meeting yesterday, Lavrov was nowhere to be seen. Later, Putin's spokesman announced Lavrov would no longer lead Russia's delegation at the upcoming G20 summit. The replacement came directly from Putin himself, a public humiliation for a man who once embodied Russian diplomacy. Insiders whisper that Putin blames Lavrov for failed talks with Washington and sees him as too cautious. For a regime built on loyalty, these betrayals are a warning sign. One after another, the pillars of Putin's system are cracking. Political scientist Ekaterina Shulman calls it the next stage of repression. She says, at first they targeted anti-war voices. Now there are none left. The machine must keep feeding itself. In other words, the Kremlin's machinery of control cannot stop. It must keep destroying to survive. Inside the corridors of power, fear now rules. Ministers glance over their shoulders. Generals speak in whispers. Even propagandists delete their old messages, afraid that something they once said in praise of Putin might now be twisted against them. In the Kremlin, nobody knows who will be next. Putin, increasingly alone, trusts almost no one. Those who approach him must pass through layers of bodyguards and silence. Intelligence reports suggest he spends more time isolated, relying on filtered briefings from subordinates too afraid to tell him the truth. The man who once commanded total control is now surrounded by shadows, and the shadows are whispering against him. The irony is undeniable. For decades, Putin ruled by fear. He built a nation where loyalty was everything, where betrayal was death. But now, that same fear is turning inward. His own allies, terrified of being purged, are starting to look for exits, for safe havens, for backup plans. Some have moved their families abroad. Others are quietly transferring assets out of Russia. They still smile on camera, but their eyes tell another story. The story of a regime eating itself alive. Every purge weakens the state. Every dismissal cuts another thread in the web that once held Russia together. The oligarchs no longer feel safe. The generals no longer feel secure. The propagandists, once so loud, are beginning to fall silent. The empire that once seemed eternal now feels fragile. Today, Vladimir Putin stands at the center of it all. Still feared, still powerful, but no longer untouchable. The circle around him grows smaller each day. allies fall, enemies multiply. And as the storm inside the Kremlin grows louder, one truth becomes impossible to ignore. The greatest threat to Putin's rule no longer comes from the streets or from foreign powers. It comes from within. The walls he built to protect himself are closing. The machine he created to crush his enemies has turned on its creator. And somewhere behind those guarded doors, the man who made Russia fear him now fears Russia itself.